Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about all things gear reinforcement. How does it work? Where can you do it? What are the bonuses? When should you do it? All the questions, we're going to be trying to answer them all. First, what is gear reinforcement? Gear reinforcement is a crafting system in the Slormancer that allows you to increase the stats on your gear as well as increase the power of the legendary effect on your gear should your gear pieces have a legendary effect, of course. You can do it here at Rick Manalan. When you talk to him, he opens up his crafting menu, the Slormatizer, which is the crafting system used to reinforce gear. As you guys can see, maybe if you look at the items in my inventory and on my character, there are these little plus numbers underneath the level of the item, which indicate the current reinforcement tier. They go from +0 to a lot of the items here in my bag to up to +20 on my boots. The plus indicates the reinforcement tier of the item. It starts at 0, which is the base, and it can go all the way up to infinity. Well, not really infinity, but arbitrarily large. There is no cap on the level on reinforcement levels. You can just keep going if you want to, but should you want to, probably not, because the bonuses don't scale linearly. Instead, they have diminishing returns, and I've made a little table and chart to show you how much you can get out of reinforcing your gear. So if we look here, there we have the tier that you're at, which starts at 0, which is just a base item, and of course you have a 0% bonus at tier 0. Going from tier 0 to tier 1 gives you a 15% bonus off the base, which is huge. Like, that is a huge deal. Then going from tier 1 to tier 2 gives you a 14% bonus off the base, so total 29% bonus. So basically a third already at just tier 2, right? And it just keeps going, decreasing by 1% all the way to tier 15. When you go from 14 to 15, you get another 1% bonus, and then every tier after 15 gives you another 1% flat bonus. So if you look at the graph here, it shows you that the graph goes up and up and up, and it flattens out, and then at tier 15 it starts to straighten out, and then you have just a straight increase over time. Now 1% of the bonus, if we look at the relative increase, right, in comparison, if we also consider sort of the prior bonuses, it becomes really small. We are at like 0.4% increase for additional levels, so it's really minuscule beyond tier 15. But also, like, if we look at these relative increases, like tier 15 is also just like tier 14 is also just a 0.9% increase, so that's really not that great. Legendary effects work a little bit different. We can look at it here. If you put a legendary in the Slormatizer, it shows you whether it scales with reinforcement levels, because the tooltip changes. The tooltip displays the base amount as well as the reinforcement level bonus, which is just a flat bonus you get for each reinforcement level up to level 15, beyond which legendary effects stop scaling with reinforcement level. So for the Winds of Harmony gloves that I'm wearing here, the base is a -5% cooldown time, and you get an additional 1% reduction for every reinforcement level. So at level 15, this would be 20% reduced cooldown time for all skills. All right, now that we've done that and whether you should do it, I'm just gonna explain to you something, and I'm going to get this out of the way. If you're a new player and you're not familiar with any of these systems, the general advice is that reinforcing your gear early and often is a good idea, especially on the first 5 levels. Because if we go back, look at the chart, right? Here, these bonuses are just big. These are big, big numbers that give you a huge power boost and make your gameplay much faster and your power progression much faster. And the resources are very plentiful for these lower level tiers. So if you're a newer player and wondering, should I start reinforcing my gear? Yes, you should. Don't worry about it. Don't hoard your items. It's not worth it. Just grab the power. It's a good idea. So, how does the Slormatizer work? First, you have a gear slot where you can put your gear, your gear piece, and the gear slot indicates which tier it is. So this ring that I'm putting in is tier 1. Each item has a reinforcement potential which goes from 0 to 100%. It increases with kills, so if you kill enemies while wearing this item, your reinforcement potential goes up. It can go up all the way to 100% and influences your total success chance, which is indicated down here. Then you also can go to your crafting mat tab, and the game always highlights the Slormite, which are these green chunks up here, of the same tier as your item, right? So this is a tier 1 item, this is a tier 1 Slormite chunk. If we put the tier 1 Slormite chunk in, you can see that it then becomes, you actually get a success chance, and you always need a Slormite to reinforce your gear, right? That is the basic starting point. If your Slormite and your item are of the same tier, your total success chance becomes equal to your reinforcement potential. So if you add 100, right? Let's say you're just a player starting out, you have a 100% potential item, which is indicated by this little plus sign, right? These little yellow pluses underneath these items that shows that the item is at 100% reinforcement potential. You can just put in one of these and you can just increase it like that. You keep playing, your potential reaches 100% again, and you can keep doing that. You will have thousands of these. I just from time to time keep crafting them up for reasons that you will see later. But if you're just playing, you will have thousands of the lower crafting mats. So really, you can use the first 3 levels for sure, and they're super cheap too, right? So 353 gold, that is very affordable for a huge bonus. This would be 14% bonus, so that is pretty good. Now, beyond that, we have these modifier slots. We can modify the craft or the reinforcement with up to 3 modification items, which are either Slorm lines, which you need also for rerolling stats with the blacksmith, or Slormandrites, which are also used for crafting stats on Reaper affinity stuff and attributes and skill masteries onto your gear, right? The Slormandrite of true potential is used to increase the level of an item, and the Slormandrite of negation is used to extract Slormites from items, which is very useful and very important, as you will see later on. As far as the Slormatizer goes now, instead of the crafting, the Slorm lines just increase your reinforcement chance, right? All the way from 0.01% reinforcement chance, which you're never going to use. You're never going to use the lower level Slorm lines, and you're barely going to use the higher tier ones. It just flat out increases the reinforcement chance, so it's just an additional thing. So if we put this in, that gives us a 90% reinforcement chance, right? So at lower level, you could speed up your progress there. You could brute force some stuff, but that's really not that worth it in the opinion of most players. The slow lines are really niche case uses. However, the other slow mandrites are really super useful. The slow mandrite of true potential and the slow mandrite of negation are barely used. You should really not care about them at all, to be honest, in my opinion. But the others have a lot of bonuses. So let's look at them. The Slormancer of Aptitude increases your critical reinforcement chance as well as your critical potential. So let's put one in here. And as we guys can see, our critical reinforced chance goes up. The base chance is 10%, right? Even if we take a lower tier Slormite, the base chance stays the same, and it goes up by, oh, we need one in, so goes up by 5%. So if we put in 18, we have 100% critical reinforce chance. Now, what does critical reinforce do? Critical reinforce just means that your item gains a certain amount of reinforcement potential after crafting. Usually, when you're using the reinforcement potential, right? When you're reinforcing an item, the potential gets reset to 0, and you just need to kill enemies again to increase your potential. But by using crits, you can increase your chance to get some potential back. Now, the potential that you get back, you can see in the tooltip here, which at base is 15%, which is pretty nice. But as the Slormite of Aptitude shows, it also increases your critical potential by 3% for each of these that you put in. So if you put in 18, then you get back 69% potential, and of course the magic number 29. If you put in 29 Slormandrites of Aptitude, you get back 102%, which of course the number potential can't go above 100, which means you get 100% potential right away, and which means you can just keep crafting on this item if you have enough Slormandrites of Aptitude. The other Slormandrite that's super interesting is Slormandrite of Virtue, which increases your double reinforced chance, as well as increasing your failure chance. Now let's put some of these in. As you guys can see, double reinforce just means that you get 2 reinforcement levels instead of 1. Very simple. 2 reinforcement levels. It starts out always at 4%. It can go up by 5% like so. If we now put in 19, we're at 99%, which that's not a risk we want to take. So at 20, you have a guaranteed double reinforce, but also your failure chance goes up by 60%. So you need to increase your success chance by enough to offset this, which is basically impossible because the failure chance is always a flat modifier. So no matter how high your success chance, you will always have a failure, like you'll always have a chance to fail, because success chance can also not go beyond 100, right? So this can, even if we had a 100% success chance in this case, we would at most get 40% like effective success chance, because it would be multiplied by the failure chance. And this is where the Slormandrite of Harmony comes in, which reduces your failure chance by 1% for each of these that you put in. So if you have 60% failure chance, you have to put in 60 of these. So mandrites of harmony, right? So this would be a pretty common craft if you had 100% potential, right? So 29 of aptitude, 20 of virtue, and 60 of harmony. That is a guaranteed crit with 100% potential and a guaranteed double. So it's a guaranteed 100% double crit, and you have 100% success chance if we were at 100% potential, which we're not currently. All right. The limiting factor for your crafting as you go up are going to be the Slormites. These green chunks up here. If the lower tiers, the first 5 tiers are super plentiful, you're going to have tons of these. Trust me, they're not going to be an issue. You can also craft lower tier ones for very cheap at Rick Manilin's sort of upgrade menu, where you can also upgrade lower tiers to higher tiers for the cost of free to 1. This is okay for lower tiers. For higher tiers, it's super inefficient. I wouldn't recommend doing it past tier 9 for sure. All right, so now we have all the basics explained. I'm going to show you how you can increase your reinforcement levels once you're past sort of the leveling stage. You have accrued some resources, you have accrued a bunch of stuff. Let's see how we would take an item from, let's take this ring from +1 to +15. All right, so now as I've shown you, if you use the same tier Slormite as item, your success chance is the same as your potential. If you use a higher tier, for each additional higher tier, your success chance goes up by 25%, your critical reinforced chance goes up by 10%, and your double reinforced chance goes up by 5%, right? So that means if we take a Slormite that is 4 tiers higher than your item, like in this case, you have a guaranteed 100% success chance, even if your potential is super low. Let's see how that goes. Now, this is more expensive, of course, right? We can just keep doing this. Oh, we got a crit. Nice. We got another crit. And which keeps us around 15%. All right. Now we used a tier 8. And tier 8 is sort of the point at which you are going to run into the point where you're really struggling to keep up with Slormites, and also where it's going to be harder to maintain your level. Now, beyond this, you can do 2 things. You can either increase with the same level, right? And then you put in a bunch of Slorm lines, like so. That also gives you a 100% success chance. Or you can start using Slormandrites of aptitude, right? We're going to do this. And also use the same tier and get you to 100% with a guaranteed crit, which gets us to +7, and at which point we can just crit our way up by just adding these of aptitude. So as you guys can see, you keep doing this. Now we're at tier 8 again. We're going to add these in. Yep. and you can see already 50k gold, so it's not super easy. So at plus 9 and onwards, it becomes really a question of, do you have enough Slormites of higher tiers to keep going? Like tier 14 and tier 13 Slormites, they're just super rare. You're going to have a really hard time finding these. So you need to acquire them a separate way. I'm going to show you how you would usually do that. But we can reduce the strain of Slormite, right? The bottleneck by double critting all the way to the top from here. So you would put in a plus 9, use 29 aptitude, use 20 virtue, and then use 60 of the harmony Slormandrite. Alright, that's a lot of clicking, which is really the most annoying part. And this gives us a guaranteed double crit, which puts us at 11 with 100% potential. Now we're going to do a little trick. I just can't be. Hold on, if we do it in the inventory, you can separate out the stacks that you need, right? This, you just drag it into the tab, and then you can press shift and right click to separate them out by tens. Some people like to prep this all. I don't mind clicking the others for some reason, but the 60 really gets on my nerves. You can't do this in the Slormatizer menu because every time you right click on anything, it will automatically put it into the Slormatizer. All right, let's put in 29. Let's put in 20 of these. And let's put in 60. You need to really drag them in. That's 100. That gets us to 13. Now, there is another way, another thing you can do. I want to show you. Hold on. 96. Let's drag these out. There's another thing you can do, which is the Slormandrite of Fate, which I haven't talked about up until now because they're sort of the secondary way that people craft up item levels. The big benefit, there's really two benefits to using Slormandrites of Fate, is that they come with additional reinforcement chance as well. So if you don't have a lot of potential on the item at some point, right, these also increase your reinforcement chance, which is super good, right? If you just want to force your first double crit, this could be a really good tool of doing it. The big negative is that you have to use all 36 more Slormandrite of Harmony. So let's put these in. I'm just going to use them to demonstrate this once. Now we have the 13 tier, right, which is still below the next one. The final one, which is tier 14, we're going to put in the 96, which gives us guaranteed double crit, and also 111% reinforcement potential, right? Which means we keep the reinforcement potential going. And we also put in 96 Slormandrites of Harmony, which then gives us the guaranteed double crit. It costs 1.5 million gold, which is a lot. I'm not going to say this, but in the very late game, that is very affordable, to be honest. And we use the Slormatizer, and boom, the item is at level 15 or tier 15 with 100% potential. Now, if you really want to go beyond this, which most people don't, but if you do, you need tier 14 tier 14 Slormites. These, the ancestral flawless Slormites, because one of the factors that I have touched on very briefly is that if you use a lower tier Slormite, it also adds a 50% failure chance. Now, the 50% failure chance is really a huge detriment, but it goes up by 50 more for each difference, right? So if you go from 14 to 15, it's one level difference. If we now instead use a 13, it goes to 100. If we use a 12, it goes to 150. The display doesn't show the 150, but it does, and so on and so forth. But any item above 15 and including 15, you treats this difference as if the item was at tier 15, right? So your ancestral flawless Slumite will always start out with 50% failure chance, whereas all the others will use the usual calculation, which means that the failure chance would go up by 50 for each additional level. So if you want to go beyond level 15, let's say with these boots that I have here that are level plus 20, if we put in the tier 14 Slowmite, it's still just a 50% failure chance. So you really need these. And how do you get these? Well, you saw how I crafted up my ring with the Slormatizer to all the way to up to plus 15. Then you can go to Friedrich, and he has this option here, which is extract Slormite. The extract Slormite option takes out a Slormite of the tier of the highest tier, right? Possible of that item. So a plus 15 will take out a plus 14, right? Or a tier 14 Slormite. So in order to get this, you can extract Slormite. Yes, it doesn't destroy the item. And you have an additional. There were 3 before, now there are 4. The item is reset. You can rerun the process. And this is really right now the most efficient way of acquiring high tier Slormites in the late game for crafting up super high tiers. You can also craft Slormlines and Slormandrites at Friedrichs, which is super useful because this is how you can easily get a lot of them. As you guys can see, I have a ton of materials to do these, and this is one of the other places where the Slormandrite of Fate can be really super useful, because if you look at it, he doesn't require rare fragments in comparison to the Slormandrite of Aptitude, which requires rare fragments, as well as the Slormandrite of Virtue. So if you want to use the triple resource craft, right, which is this gives you crit, this gives you double, this reduces failure chance, you use fragments to craft these Slormandrites, you're going to be really limited by the number of rare fragments you have. Whereas if you use the Slormandrites of Fate, they don't require rare fragments. So that's an additional bonus of using the Slormandrite of Fate. You can really use both. They're both totally fine. And that is basically it, guys. I hope you guys learned something today, and I'll see you next time.